Thanks for this opportunity to talk to you. Just a bit about myself and some of my background. I am not a scientist by training or by profession. I've been a teacher for 30 and more than 30 years. Started out 2 years on the Apache Reservation in Peridot, Arizona. Okay, teaching one of the mission schools to the Apache. 6 more years in a grade school in South Central Wisconsin in Waterloo. 20 years at Northland Lutheran High School, where I was the science department. Okay, and taught all the sciences, and it was there that I really started in depth in my pursuit of science. And I'm now in my 5th year at Martin Luther College. My role is in the life sciences department. I teach the freshman general bio, which gives me a unique view. I get to meet virtually every teacher now that is going to go through the Wells system. All of the education majors have to take bio, so I get to meet them all pretty much, okay? And many of our future pastors as well. And then I teach courses in the life science majors, genetics, zoology, some of the advanced bio courses, okay? Educational background, degree at Martin Luther College in education degree at Cardinal Stritch University, and a biology degree from Clemson University. Okay, so not a research scientist, but especially my degree at Clemson, I was up to here in evolution. Okay, every single day that I took that course, sometimes after my homework and after that, I just felt like I need to go take a shower. Okay, I was just getting sick of it. But what really started me on the quest for educating about evolution, no less than 3 separate occasions. When I was at Northland, I had a student return after approximately a semester or two at a secular university, questioning their faith. And these were students who came from strong Wells families. They were the ones who 8 years, parochial elementary ed, 4 years at Northland at a parochial Lutheran high school, from baby on, exposed to the Word, devout parents kids you would never think would question their faith, and after a semester is in my room wondering, really? Do we really believe creation? Really? It seems so, speaking of evolution, seems so logical. Are you really sure about this? This is no less than 3 different students. One of them in tears. Wow. Never would have thought that. Especially from the students then it made me wonder, how many more didn't come back? How many more were there that just simply let it go? Never bothered to come back and ask the questions, that just simply allowed the faith to die and just quietly slid away from their Savior. I probably don't want to know that. Okay? And so, one of my jobs at MLC, since I get to see every single teacher that comes through, pretty much, and since my course in bio is about the only chance they have to really dig into evolution, okay, so time to talk about evolution. So I get to train teachers, okay? When I first started my ministry, and maybe you have a similar experience, evolution just wasn't talked about. It just wasn't. We'd come to that point in the textbook. I remember my grade school experience. Maybe yours was similar. We come to that section in the textbook, and the teacher would simply say, "Oh, that's evolution. We don't believe that. We believe creation." And on we went. That was it. That summed up my evolution training in grade school. And it pretty much summed up my evolution training in high school. Pretty much summed up my kids' evolution training in their grade schools too. And I don't know, maybe yours was similar. And then we go off to secular universities, and where this is so laid out and it seems so logical, and no wonder so many of our youth begin to question. Okay, I believe we need to talk about evolution. A couple of different reasons. Look at some of the wonderful opportunities that the Lord is presenting to us with our choice schools here in Milwaukee. Wow, we have students who are sitting in our grade schools who maybe have never cracked open a Bible in their lives. That's amazing. What a blessing. We can't just tell them, oh, we don't believe evolution. What? What do you mean you don't believe evolution? Everybody believes evolution, right? It's all over the place. Tell my future teachers. That's sixth grader. With the way that our schools are emphasizing outreach and using their schools as an outreach tool, that sixth grader may never have heard any Bible stories before. Never, ever. They don't know what creation is. They were raised with evolution. Okay, so I try to at least educate them in some of the basics of what evolution is all about. Okay. What am I going to talk to you about? I am not going to give you all kinds of ammunition that you can now go back and blast the theory out of the water. It's not going to happen. Okay? You will never, ever, ever argue somebody out of believing in evolution. Just like you will never, never, ever argue somebody into believing creation. Okay? That's the job of the Holy Spirit. Why do we believe creation? Because we believe. Christians believe God's Word. Okay? Okay? What I can tell you, and what I'm going to tell you tonight is, okay, the theory of evolution, first of all, what it is, actually, and what are some of the things that the theory of evolution would actually have you believe. Okay? When it's presented to students, it's presented in such a way that it makes it seem so very logical and common sense, and I'm going to hopefully show you that it's not quite as logical and common sense as the textbooks would have you believe it to be. Okay? Give you some talking points. Okay? Give you some talking points maybe. If you are engaged in conversation with an evolutionist, something to talk about. A way to build a bridge. Okay? We're never going to win an argument, and you're not going to win converts with this, but we can at least talk, and I can at least give you some of the what the theory actually teaches. Okay, so it all began here. Charles Darwin on the Origin of Species. Anybody ever read it? Everybody knows about it. Nobody's ever read it. I finally got around to reading it 5 years ago, back to front. And you know what? Darwin was 95% correct. The man was a genius when it came to the sciences. He was a gifted experimenter and a gifted observer, highly intelligent. His experiences aboard the Beagle and with his own field experiences, the man was a genius. And he never actually went out to destroy the Christian faith. He never came right out and said, there is no God. Okay? And by his own admission, he never wanted to bring down the Christian faith. And so this was published in 1859, and it became an instant bestseller. Okay? Easily his most famous work. Indications say he had the rudiments of his theory in place already by 1938. He delayed publication. There's debate. We're not going to get into the whole the biography of Charles Darwin, although it's a fascinating story. He did not invent the theory. Darwin did not invent the theory. He put pieces together. Even his grandfather Erasmus had the original grain of thought of of what evolution is. He drew upon a number of different places, and he put a few pieces together. Okay. Most notably, the piece he put together was the idea of natural selection. I'm going to spend some time with that. Okay. Probably the most immediate dramatic effect that the realm of science has ever seen. Ever. Instant acceptance. Instant. That never happens with new scientific ideas. Usually with scientific ideas, a generation has to die before the new ideas are accepted. This was almost instant. And his ideas quickly spilled over into other realms. Sociology, even economics. Evolutionary economics. They grasp this. It's amazing. Even those not educated in the biological sciences were studying it. Darwin became a rock star. Okay, all over Europe. Okay, in spite of all his book had two basic points. Okay, he spends a lot of time here. He spends a lot of time talking about artificial selection, which we've known about since the beginning of time. Ever since people have been practicing agriculture, since biblical times, we've known about selective breeding. He spends a lot of time with that. And here is the major thesis of his book. We can sum up the origin of the species by saying, since we know that artificial selection works, natural selection is simply artificial selection drawn out over eons of time, and that's the mechanism that drives the origin of all the species. There. Now you don't have to read the book. I just told you basically all you really need to know about it.
How do you define artificial selection?
Artificial selection is, and I'm going to get into the distinction in a bit, but very briefly, artificial selection is taking an organism or set of organisms, so let's say it's tomato plants, okay, and selecting the specific characteristics you want. Do you want nice red tomatoes? Do you want yellow tomatoes? Do you want juicy tomatoes? Do you want heavy tomatoes? Selecting only those plants that have that one and then allowing them to breed. Okay, they have another generation. Through subsequent generations, we get tomatoes that are bigger or riper or redder or juicier or heavier. Okay, we can do the same thing with breeds of cattle, dogs, cats. Okay, so that's basically what artificial selection is. Natural selection, Darwin said it's the same thing, only it happens slower, and nature does this. Okay. Here's the basic assumptions. Here's the big one. The major assumption driving evolution is all the answers we need in the realm of life sciences can be found in the natural world. Only physical, observable, natural world. In other words, God's not allowed. Deities, spirits, the tooth fairy, whatever. Okay? Don't need it. Don't need it. Nothing supernatural, nothing miraculous. The everyday natural world is enough to explain everything that happens in the realm of biology. That's what made it so popular. Victorian England and Europe intellectualism was ready for a break from anything religious. Here's something that came that was not religious. Bam! Latched onto it. And that's what still drives its popularity today. No God. No God. Don't need God. We can get rid of God. We don't need God to explain anything in the natural world. That's why the proponents of evolution still hold on to it today. We can do this without God. Okay? Principle of uniformity basically says that the processes that we see today in the natural world are the same ones that have been at work since the beginning, are working now, and will continue to work at the same rate and in the exact same way. Okay? It's not directed. In other words, there's no ultimate goal in evolution. It's just a series of changes. And if a change happens to be good, it will be selected for. So, for example, birds didn't evolve wings so that they could fly, because that implies a purpose. Okay, it's not as though there was because we got to remember, nothing supernatural, no driving, guiding force, no designer. So it's not as though sometime in the future we need organisms that can take to the air, start evolving wings. No, the evolving came first, and pretty soon we had organisms that could somehow flap, or they could scamper along, and they could jump, and that evolved into gliding, which maybe even evolved into powered flight, etc. Okay, all through natural selection. Okay, you didn't evolve a heart to pump blood. You had the primitive, whatever mammalian ancestor we had a conglomeration of muscles that could pump blood, and after a while, through natural selection, the more effective ones got to pass along their genes until what do we have today? The 4-chambered heart that you know of today. Okay, some evolved the 3-chambered heart, like a frog, or a 2-chambered heart, like a fish. Okay, but we didn't evolve a heart to pump blood. The pumping came as a result, which kind of already should be, what? Really? How do you evolve something without a purpose for it? And how do you evolve something, and how do you select for something if there's nothing to select and nothing to select for? And it doesn't matter, okay, but this is the way it is. The similarity shows relationships. Okay, so back in Darwin's age, the world voyages were just, James Cook had just circumvented circumscribed the globe. Whole new worlds were open. Discovered things like primates. Wow, look how close they are to people. Yeah, similarities. And finally, eons and eons of time. Okay, so we have these basics. This idea of perpetual change, common descent. Okay, the multiplication of species. As the species begin to evolve, they branch off. We get more and more species, some of which have gone extinct. Okay, some of which have evolved into new species. I'm going to spend more time, though, on natural selection. I'm going to skip this one. We can sum it up here. We can just sum it up here. Evolution is descent with modification. Okay? All right. So essentially, here's what Darwinian evolution says. Essentially, individuals within a population differ from each other. No shock there. Okay? Those differences are, at least in some part, passed from parent to offspring. Again, no shock there. You are living proof of that. I don't think any one of you is the genetic clone of your parent. Ladies, are you the genetic clones of your mothers? No. Okay, gentlemen, are you the genetic clones of your fathers? No, in spite of the fact that mom or dad may have once said to you, "You're just like your mother." And it may not have necessarily been a compliment, okay? Or vice versa, okay? But we have similarities, but we also have differences. The individuals that are more successful at survival and reproduction, especially reproduction. Okay? The successful individuals are not just lucky, they are the ones that are successful because the variant traits are more suited to each other. Okay? So, natural selection acts at the genetic level. It changes the genome. Offspring with a better set of genetics is ultimately what's selected for. But evolution doesn't see the genetics. Evolution and natural selection sees the characteristics. And so therefore, whatever has the better genetics, okay, will have the better characteristics. and therefore will tend to get selected. So it's not purpose-driven. It's just simply what works best at the genetic level. Okay, so it's not looking ahead. It's actually kind of looking back. What has the best genetics? Okay, this is the one that gets to be the reproducing one. Please note, survival of the fittest, as we so often equate with evolution. Darwin never used that phrase. Okay, never. It's always been, oh, it's survival of the fittest. And by that we tend to mean the biggest, strongest, fastest, biggest teeth, biggest claws, can roar the biggest. That's the one that's going to survive. Wrong. No, that's not what evolution teaches. Evolution teaches it's the one that, the one that produces the most offspring. That's fitness. What produces the most offspring? Fitness is measured, and there's formulas for this. You can actually calculate fitness, but it's always by the number of offspring. Not the biggest, not the fastest, okay? Not the best camouflage. What produces the most offspring? Fitness might be nothing more than it has a 2% increased resistance to the local bacteria of the area. That might just do it. Fitness might be a slightly better tendency to digest the local plant material. Okay? Not biggest, strongest, scariest. You know, what can reproduce the best? Okay? Let's see if I can step you through what natural selection is, and most importantly, what natural selection and evolution would have you believe. Okay? So, let's say that I have a recipe for sugar cookies. I'm not the greatest baker. Okay? My son can tell you I'm not the greatest. It's all right. It's a recipe for sugar cookies. Okay? I am going to allow you all to copy my recipe with one stipulation. I'll get to why I'm going to put that stipulation on. You have to copy it by hand. No taking pictures with your phone, no slapping it on a photocopier, no copying it on a flash drive. You must have my original recipe. You must copy yours by hand. You are going to take your copied recipes, okay, and you're going to bake batches of cookies. Okay. Over time, as you bake your batches of cookies, others will sample your cookies. Okay? Over time, these copied recipes may carry copying mistakes. If we have a copying mistake that's really, really lousy, no one is going to want that recipe. Therefore, natural selection would select against whatever that recipe was with its errors. It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination, okay? If you miscopied tablespoon for teaspoon and you're talking about salt, yeah, that batch of cookies, okay, isn't, okay? If it's going to be, cloves and you substitute cloves of garlic, okay, that's not going to be such a good batch. On the other hand, maybe a copying mistake will actually enhance the recipe, and therefore the enhanced recipe will generate more interest in this batch of cookies or this baker, leading to this recipe being copied. It selects in favor. There. That new recipe now has officially evolved. The recipe has evolved. Okay? Here's where the textbooks stop. Okay? Here's where the textbooks stop. Seems logical, right? Well, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. So what's the problem? Okay, what's the problem? All right. First thing, I insisted that you have to be able to copy it by hand. Okay? Well, the recipe is the genetics. There's a copying mechanism in genetics that is prone to making mistakes. It can make mistakes. Mistakes do happen, mutations. Okay? So therefore, we have to have a method of copying that will allow for mistakes. Okay? Secondly, the person doing the copying can't read the language that they're copying. All they're doing is copying squiggles and circles and dots, okay? Think back to your basic genetics. Transcription is a blind process. It simply copies A's and C's and G's and T's from DNA onto RNA and then back to DNA. It doesn't have any idea what it's copying. It's just copying. So therefore, and it's not interpreting, it's just copying. If there's a mistake, it's not going to know. All right? So therefore, the person who's doing the copying can't read the language. Okay? You're going to give this recipe over to a baker. Okay? Which is the same as having your DNA expressed into proteins. Okay? The baker is not going to bring in any of his years of experience, his expertise, or his editing ability. He is going to simply follow the recipe verbatim and produce cookies. I don't care if it says a cup of salt, that's what he's going to do. All right? And he's going to produce recipes. Once again, our mechanism for reading DNA into proteins, okay, doesn't know about the original intent of the DNA. It doesn't edit it. It doesn't know what it just simply copies. Remember your process of translation from high school bio or from your genetics course. Translation just simply reads 3 at a time, amino acid, 3 amino acid, strings them up. There it is. It doesn't know if it's making junk or not. In fact, in biotechnology, we've even harnessed that in bacteria to reprogram bacteria. Instead of making bacterial proteins, it makes human proteins or whatever proteins we tell it to. It's a blind process. So this process is completely blind. Okay? And secondly, or finally, we're making this huge assumption that a copying mistake can somehow lead to an improvement. Now, even with my limited culinary ability, there's just not many mistakes I can think of that would make a sugar cookie recipe better. Anybody help me? Okay. Oh, I'm glad you said that. Adding chocolate chips. Let's add, but wait a second. My original recipe doesn't have chocolate chips. So in order to add chocolate chips, what has to happen? Yeah. So what I can add chocolate chips, but how do you get chocolate chips out of a recipe that never called for it to begin with? We would need enough copying mistakes to somehow equal chocolate chips. Okay? Or the evolutionists would say, no problem. Somewhere in the copying process, I copied a line twice. That gives me extra genetic material to work with that I can mutate enough times so that eventually that cup of flour turns into a cup of chocolate chips. Okay? Now, I'm not done yet. We're not. And as you're seeing natural selection going, well, okay, it's looking less and less and less powerful. All right, now, here's what natural selection and evolution tells us. If we go through this process enough times, for enough generations, with enough copying mistakes, eventually, one of those batches of chocolate chip cookies is not going to be, sugar cookies is no longer going to be sugar cookies. It's going to be peach cobbler. Okay? Given enough time and enough copying mistakes and enough of this process repeating and repeating, it's now going to be peach cobbler and eventually tuna casserole. What? That's exactly what evolution teaches us. We started out, evolution says, with whatever this universal ancestor was. Very likely some kind of a single-celled little slime bag that didn't have DNA. It just simply had a few base pairs of RNA. But that was enough. The RNA somehow figured out how to duplicate itself. It could pass itself along. Eventually, through the ages, it duplicated itself enough with enough errors that that one little single-celled slime bag with only a few base pairs of RNA, one branch developed into oak trees and the other branch developed into blue whales. All through the process of copying, replicating, mutating, repeat. Okay? That's natural selection. That's what evolution teaches, but that's not what you read about in textbooks because it doesn't make sense. To get a recipe for sugar cookies to end up as tuna casserole by sheer copying mistakes doesn't make sense. It's almost as if I wheeled out a little tricycle here with a manual about how to make a tricycle. I gave each of you the copy of the manual how to build a tricycle. If we make enough copies, eventually I'll have a manual for building the space shuttle, right? Well, that's what evolution teaches. Okay? And of course, the manual or the sugar cookie recipe, that's our genome. Okay? Mutated enough, that's what we get. All right? So, here's what I'd like you to do next. Cluster up a little bit and do a quick brain dump. Do you have any questions, comments, or, wow, never thought of it that way? Just process that a few seconds while I get a sip of water. And then if you have any questions, I'm going to pause it right there for just a few seconds and see what you have to say. Okay, go ahead. Okay, now, artificial selection. Artificial selection, on the other hand, has been practiced since antiquity. Okay, when Cain was a farmer. Okay, so the very first people knew about agriculture. They had domesticated, and they had crops, right? Artificial selection, breeders only allow individuals with the strongest characteristics to breed. We still practice it today. Sometimes it's in a lab, sometimes it's with the genetics. Okay, we're still looking to enhance domesticated animals and domesticated crops. One of the big differences, though, it's an intelligent process. And by intelligent, we mean someone decides what's desirable, someone decides someone makes a judgment, which individuals possess that characteristic, someone controls the mating. Okay, that's someone being whatever, the farmer, the technician, whatever. But those three are carefully controlled, and then over many generations, the organism can be significantly changed. No arguments. No arguments whatsoever. Absolutely. The tomatoes that we have today look nothing like, if you've ever seen, let's say, wild strawberries. If you ever tasted one, they're tiny. They're delicious. They're tiny, and they're full of seeds. And the varieties we have today, those great big plump ones, that was all through all through artificial selection. If you've ever tasted wild grapes, okay, there's not much grape there. It's mostly seed, and they're really, really sour, okay, compared to the grapes that we have today. That's all through artificial selection. No arguments here, none at all. Okay. So going back to our cookie thing, all right, we have the original recipe. Okay, a whole bunch of people bake the recipe, and then we have a panel of judges or whomever's picking out the best. And by that, so someone has to decide what makes a great sugar cookie. All right, I don't know. But anyway, we have our criteria. Only the best one gets selected. Only that recipe gets copied. And we start all over again. And over the course of many generations, we can improve on the original sugar cookie recipe. One thing I need to point out, though, is that the cookies we end up with are still going to be not just cookies, but sugar cookies. Okay? This process, tomatoes are going to stay tomatoes. Hogs stay hogs. Okay? we are just getting more and more and more specialized type of the same thing. This one would never produce the diversity that we see. Artificial selection will never produce the diversity that we see in nature. In fact, it would restrict it. Only the very best of whatever this is, and the others don't get a chance to breed. So therefore, here was one of, I believe, Darwin's fallacies. He equated natural selection with artificial selection. Okay, natural selection is the same thing, just spread out over time. No, because natural selection is not an intelligent process. Okay? Big tenet. Natural selection equals artificial selection. Okay? Is what Darwin said, and what most evolutionists teach, and that's what they teach in the textbooks. Next big one is common descent. And my graphic got misplaced. LUCA, a last universal common ancestor, LUCA, whatever that happens to be. We don't know. Even an evolutionist will say we don't know what that is. Okay? That eventually split off into the three main branches of the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukaryota, the three big domains. Okay? And so here is a phylogenetic tree from one of the texts that I used when I was in school. Okay? So finally we have the universal common ancestor. One branch became the archaea. Okay, we have all of these guys and all of these guys. All of the plants over here, all other animals and fungi are over here. And evolution is very big on tracing common descent. Wherever we see a branch point, like there, or there, or there, or there, that indicates a common ancestor. The lineage split, and that common ancestor is very likely extinct. Okay, so we have everywhere that we have a split point like this. If I just zoom in on this one, the uniconts, there we go. So we can expand on that. Okay, so we get all these guys. Okay, interestingly enough, the metazoa, which would include, according to evolution and according to biology, us and fungi, shared a common ancestor at some point in evolutionary time. Okay? This branched this way and became the modern fungi, and this branched this way until finally we get to the metazoa, which would include us. And, okay, there is a project underway right now. Maybe you've heard of the Tree of Life web project that is trying to make one great big tree that encompasses all life forms that are living today and that ever were. Huge. And what's kind of funny, they can't agree. I'm just going, I love it. Depends on who you talk to, they can't agree. And there should be a common tree because evolution happened only once, right? Everything has a common history, but it's interesting reading. Oh, yeah. Okay. So now, let me return to those students who came back to Northland to me. Okay, that their faith was in such trouble. Okay, why was their faith in such trouble? What was it that's caused them such agony? Okay. The idea is microevolution versus macroevolution. Okay, much of what the evolutionist points to as evidence, we do not have a problem with. In fact, I would go so far as to say that since evolution is the accepted theme for all of biology, an evolutionist can point to all of biology as evidence for evolution. Okay? And they'll point to the things like genetics and mutations. And they'll point to speciation and extinction. And they'll point to breeds and varieties of animals and resistant bacteria and say, see all these things happening? That's evidence of evolution. And then this poor student is going, you know what? That's what we were taught. Yeah, that's right. Okay? And he's right. We don't deny those. We don't deny those. Okay? It's just that the evolutionist says, see, all these little things happening over here? Okay? Look at the finches and the beaks on the Galapagos. See all these little things happening over here? Okay? That means that's how we got every living species on the planet today. Okay? All these little changes over here, okay, which we don't have a problem with. Okay? A lot of the evidence that evolutionists point to, we Christians can accept. Do species change? Yes, they do. I would love to know what was on the ark. I would love to see what did Noah actually have on that ark. I don't know, but I can almost guarantee it wasn't the same species that we have running around the world today. Okay? Did he have lions and leopards and tigers and jaguars and mountain lions and bobcats? I'm thinking not. He had a kind of cat. Did they speciate? Very likely. Personal opinion. I don't have any evidence of that. Okay? Do species change? Yes. Okay? The white-tailed deer that a hunter shoots in Texas, a big one, will go 125 pounds. A big one will go 125 pounds. That same species, the exact same species in Alberta, Canada, will go 300. Species change. The hogs that my cousin is raising in western Minnesota, nothing like the hogs that my grandfather raised on the same farm. Very different animals. Species can change. Genetics, you can believe genetics. Okay? But the evolutionist says, now, that's evidence that everything that came to be through this process. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where I say, no, stop right there. Okay? Now, with at least one of those students, when I pointed out that difference, you mean I can believe about genetics and mutations and all that? Yes. The weight of the world just came off the shoulders right in front of me. Okay? Right in front of me. Oh! Okay? Sure. Darwin's finches. Is it possible that the finches develop different kinds of beaks? Yep. No problem with that. No problem with that. But they're still birds. Not only are they still birds, they're still finches. None of them are eagles or ducks. Okay? They're still finches. No lab experiment or observation has ever demonstrated macroevolution, a change in kind. None. And an evolutionist would say, well, duh, I don't have a million years to show you that. And I would say, well, that's a statement of faith, not science. It must have happened this way. That's not science then. That's a belief. Okay? So therefore, that's why I call that leap of faith. So the evolution says we see all these forces at work in microevolution or small study areas. Give ourselves all the time we need. There we go. Explains the origins of all the species. What's the problem? Okay. The problem goes back to the natural selection. You know how many changes it would take to do what you're saying. So just a quick list. Not all of evolution is contrary to God's word. Okay. I can accept that species change and DNA mutates and we have all this stuff. I can even accept the idea of natural selection. Okay. My colleague, Greg Dearson, who also teaches the life sciences at MLC, we have long discussions about this. I like the word he uses. God created his creatures with capabilities and adaptabilities. He didn't put them in environments and then say either sink or swim. They can and they do adapt to different conditions. And we don't have any problem with that. But ducks still stay ducks. Ducks don't turn into rabbits. Okay? All right. And finally, if you're ever, in a discussion with an evolutionist, please understand what evolution does not teach. First of all, evolution does not claim to know the origin of life. Okay, so if you try to back an evolutionist into a corner and say, what was the first life form? They'll say, I don't know. And we don't care. Evolution takes over once life was established. So they'll say, we're working on it, but it doesn't bring down the theory of evolution. Please, please, please. Okay, man didn't descend from apes. Okay, man. Okay, so if we just erase these from the top, okay, people, apes, common ancestor. Okay, that's what they teach. No evolutionist says that we descended from a chimp. At some point, a chimp had to give birth to a person. Okay, that's not what he says. No, we had a common ancestor. One line went this way. One line went this way. We're over here. The great apes are over here. Okay, we're cousins. That's all. Okay. Careful with this one. The survival of the fittest. Okay. It's not necessarily the biggest, strongest, ugliest, meanest. It's whatever has the best genetics that enables it to adapt to its environment, that enables it to reproduce more. Okay? Okay? So just some concluding thoughts. How do we respond to evolution? With Scripture. Okay, with Scripture. However, there are weaknesses in the theory that we can be aware of and that we can talk about. Okay. Also, please understand that evolution is itself evolving. Okay. And I've been doing a lot of studying on that, and it's not just natural selection, but horizontal gene transfer and transposons. Okay, that's in there as well. There's endogenous, inner differences that they're exploring. Okay, but still leaves out God. It's science. And I'm not saying that every evolutionist is out to destroy your faith, okay? But it is a lie that Satan grasps onto. Okay, he can use it, okay? And it's everywhere. And it's the same old lie that he goes all the way back to the garden. Did God really say? Okay. And it's everywhere. These I developed especially when I showed this to a bunch of Christian teachers. Okay, do we develop a Christian or Lutheran body of science? I believe absolutely not. No, we don't need to do that. If we only teach the science that's in the Bible, we're not going to have a lot of science. But that's okay. It's not what the Bible is for. The Bible is to show us Christ and how to get to heaven. Science is a human endeavor. We don't need to mix the two up. And please, I always get just a touch defensive when we talk about issues about science and faith. There's a lot of other challenges to our faith and a lot of other subject areas as well. Okay, lots of other places, not just science. But the ideas are all the same. It's a human body of knowledge. Scripture transcends that. Just watch out for the errors, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's where I am going to end today.
All right, let's give it a welcome.